everyone. Welcome back to the Service Management Leadership Podcast. Today, we're going to talk more Itil 4 with Mark Bradley, David Cannon, both authors of the Itil 4 book, Digital and IT Strategy, DITS. I don't want to call it DITS. Let's say DITS. Guys, how are you doing?
Doing great.
Doing really well. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, I'm enjoying. I enjoy scratching my Itil nerd itch and talking shop with people. So I'm always really excited to have these conversations. So you two were chosen to be authors to contribute to this book, DITS, talking IT and digital strategy. How'd you get chosen to contribute?
Well, I guess it started with me, so I'll kick it off. I'd been involved in version 3, so the service operation book in 2007, and then the service strategy book in 2011. So, some time had passed, and I'd gone to work for Forrester and had been out of circulation for a while. But I left Forrester, and just at about the time they were looking for somebody to help lead the digital and IT strategy work. And I approached them and I said, "You're still looking for someone?" And they said, "Absolutely. And you'd be great since you wrote the service strategy book." And so I kind of found my way in. And then Mark, I'll let him tell his side of the story. But my side of the story was I contacted Mark because I'd been talking with him. Mark and I had worked in HP many years ago. And I knew part of what Mark's background was and said, "Hey, Mark, I know you're in the innovation section within Motorola, and digital and IT strategy is all about innovation. How would you like to join us and help write this book?" So that was my side of the story.
I said, "Absolutely, sign me up."
So, Mark, was there any point along that journey that made you second guess that decision?
No. I have to say it was a pure pleasure to work with David and the team, and David and I had a chance to kind of work together a little bit while we were at HP. We worked at a couple of accounts, and then I was plugged in pretty well when he was working on the service strategy, when he was working on KPIs and metrics, and we were building a product called Executive Scorecard, which kind of had all those products. So. Big fan of David's work, and to have a chance to be a part of his team in any way, sign me up. I was excited to be there and do what I could do to help.
David's a really sharp guy.
Yes.
I sent you the most loaded question there to start with, so forgive. So we talk. It's the three of us laugh because we talk shop, and
Yes.
we just before we started recording talked about the difference between service strategy and DITS, and how organizations did not really fully adopt service strategy. So David, this is a setup question. What are the differences between service strategy and DITS, and do you think it'll be better adopted?
Yeah, so first of all, the differences. Service strategy is very much written in the era where strategy was much more long-term kind of planning process within the business. The enterprise strategy would be defined at one level, and then all the other business units would have to go and define their strategy. And then from those strategies, they'd get their budgets and so on. It was a lengthy and detailed process. And the service strategy component of that was written specifically for the type of organizations that were providing services internally within their organization. So it was typically IT departments providing services to business users, and it was really it wasn't the highest level of strategy. It was really about how does IT, or how does a service provider of technology services support the business outcomes of the organization it's working with. And in some cases, those organizations may be external, but primarily we were thinking internal. And so it isn't. So at one level, it's not completely strategic. It's very much more tactical. It's very much more, how do you work within the business and across the business units to define how you support the overall strategy? So it's a little bit more tactical than strategic, although there are, of course, a lot of strategic elements to that. That is the one difference. The other difference, as I've said, is it talks about a strategic planning cycle that is typically done once a year. It's very process heavy and involves all kinds of different budgeting cycles and so on. The new book really is not about an internal IT department trying to support a business. It's about a business that is trying to use technology so that it can be competitive, so that it can really go out there and either disrupt the market that it's in or compete effectively in that market. So it's a very different starting point. That was the first part of your question. The second part of the question is, do I see more adoption? I do, actually, and for two reasons. One is, I think that most people in IT now realize that, okay, they've got their incident management under control, they've got change problem under control. Now what they have to deal with is this huge rate of innovation that's coming along, and business units that are taking on technology, providing new services, providing new products and lines of business, without even involving the IT department, because the IT department in many organizations has not been able to think strategically. So I think many IT professionals like us are realizing, it's time to put those operational processes behind us. We've done what we're going to do there. Now let's focus more on these strategic areas. And so I think that's one reason why I think you'll see a lot more adoption. And then I think the second reason is we don't really have a choice. Businesses are using technology to do business. And, if you want to be involved in that, you're going to have to adopt a lot of the concepts and disciplines that are in this book. You don't really have a choice. Whether you even use this book to do it or not, you're going to have to do this stuff. So I do see a lot more people actually adopting it, reading it, using it. Yeah.
The chasm between business and IT is shrinking, and the
Yes.
cycles of innovation and go-to-market are shrinking. So a previous guest, a guy named Stephen Olick, had a quote, and I had never heard this before. He's a director of service management for the U.S. Army, one of the U.S. Army brigades. David, he said that IT has been a self-licking ice cream cone for too long. So, which I heard that when you were describing that, I could hear Stephen saying that, and which made me chuckle. If those of you are watching this, if you saw me chuckle, that's what was going through my brain. Which I thought is very applicable.
That's really good. And sorry, Mark, you carry on.
Oh, no. I was just going to add, for the service strategy book from the prior, I still use parts of it today. I was just in it yesterday. One of the managers wanted me to help him understand demand management, and the flywheel concept that's in here was perfect. I could just pull that image up, send it to him, and say, "Hey, this is what you're talking about." And so I still think it's probably means more today than when it was written. Coupled with the new book that we're doing, I think internally, we talked about the understanding that incident problem change request. We're pretty mature. We've been doing it for a long time. In fact, ITIL 4 changes it from a process to a practice, and they like to equate it to been doing it long enough. It's mature enough. There's plenty of material out there. Let's move on. It's a practice. So I just wanted to add that part that to me, I think it's valid, and I think it's probably more today than it was prior.
I used to read those all the time in downtime, just to sharpen and figure out how things go together. One concept, and then we'll move on. David, I want you to keep me a line here, see if I'm right. I took service strategy to be the services that then would become OLAs. We did not think at a strategic level on what was offered to the business, which would be SLAs.
I think that is how it worked out. Now, ultimately, what we tried to aim for in version 4 was this idea of the what we called a service model. And the service model was a way of tracking from the business outcome back into the IT shop to figure out, okay, this is what the business does. This is what they're going to get when they use the service. But these are the things we have to do to deliver. And so, yeah, so it, how it was used wasn't intentionally that way, but I think the way it was used is exactly as you're saying. A lot of people would use that more to define the OLAs, the operating level agreements. How do we do properly what we've promised to do? As opposed to what are the business outcomes that we're trying to achieve when people use the service. Even with that language embedded in the book, I think people still struggle to make that leap out of IT and into the business world. And at the time, I felt, Mark, you said that it was maybe it was written a little bit too soon. You're right. I think it was probably about 5 years ahead of where most people in the industry were.
Yeah.
However, that's not to mean that it's now valid, because the industry has changed so
True.
dramatically.
True.
Right? So had the industry stayed the way it was and evolved the way it was evolving at the time, that book would have been great today.
Yeah.
But it has completely shifted. The industry just does not bear any resemblance to the industry that existed when we wrote that book.
True.
So it wasn't just a matter of updating the service strategy book. We had to rewrite. We just had to put that behind us. There were some great concepts in there.
Yes.
They're still valid.
And that was what I wanted to call out. Yep.
Absolutely. But it's, as a book, as a total work, it's dated.
Correct.
The other thing I would tell you on the process versus practice, and I'm choosing my words, is not every organization is mature on those basic blocking and tackling, change, incident, problem, config, asset, like we expect. And I'm only telling you that because I see the messes created, and it's just there. And I don't want to be that, I don't mean that insulting to anyone. I just meant I try not to assume that people understand change management, change control, however you want to say it. For instance,
Jeffrey, I'd agree with you. You're right. If you look deeply enough at those, at those organizations, the organizations who still struggle with incident change, problem, SLAs, and so on, if you look deeply enough, what you'll find is that there are still some basic questions that have not been answered about, what is the relationship between the organization, business units and the IT units? How is it that we define what is important to the business impact, for example? If you look closely at organizations that are still struggling with incident, problem, change, etc., you'll find that the biggest issues are really political in nature. Because we don't understand how everything fits together. And therefore, we're relying on these top-heavy bureaucratic processes for people to communicate why something is important to them.
Yeah.
And, and tools that are really more intricate than they need to be.
Correct.
To try and link all of those pieces. And I don't think the issue is incident, problem, and change. I think it's a lot deeper than that. I think it is more political in nature.
Yes, I was going to say culture and tools, heavily reliant. So even when we've had these podcasts and we've talked to software asset management people, SAM people, they're talking about, hey, you need the process plus the tools. Don't rely solely on the tools. And that's what we're saying on these is, on change management, if you rely solely on the tool without the people or the people that execute that process or the process itself, or the people that execute the tool, you have blind spots.
Well, and now we take it to version 4, which adds a third layer on top of that. It's not just the tool and the process. It is the process that you're using and the tool that you're using are simply capabilities which enable you to do something else.
Yes.
That something else is the thing you have to understand.
Yes.
The process is not going to work. Your tools are not going to work unless you understand the thing that the process and the tools are supporting, are delivering, are enabling.
Yes.
And that connection is very often missing.
Yes.
Right. So we're doing incident management. We've got our tool is perfectly defined. Our process is magnificent. It's even better than what's in ITIL. That's great. Yeah, but what is it actually doing? What are you using that capability for? What is the business reason for you having incident management? For you having incident management in that particular way? And if you can't answer that question, then it's not working. It's dysfunctional. It's broken. So
it starts to get into the outcomes.
Yes.
In the outcome of the customer's experience, the value. Where I really like the new book, you look at it from a product manager or an offer manager, and your job is to take all these capabilities and define offers that customers need, solving their problems, providing the outcomes. And as you're trying to solve these problems, you need to understand all the capabilities that are a part of it. And as you're going through, exactly what David said, as you're going through these different capabilities, so when you're designing a new offer, you understand the capabilities that you have internally, taking advantage of some of the tools and some of the resources that you have. And then while that's happening, the company is going out and acquiring more companies to bring in additional capabilities. And now you have to figure out, can I use some of those? Maybe it's security. Can I use those security capabilities in my current offer and make it that much more valuable for the customer? And then also recognizing that in the old days, when you made a sale, it kind of was the beginning and the end of the relationship. Yes, you supported it. Yes, you had maintenance, but the relationship was different. Now, with subscription, you're seeing that the relationship now begins when that sale is done. And every day you have to prove yourself, bringing value so that they'll continue that subscription.
So the two things you all said that I couldn't agree more, they're very astute, and David started the conversation, Mark, you tidied it up, was we are enabling some kind of capability. You know, if we talk ITIL 4 and we're talking about enabling the ability to, or the capability of incorporating DevOps, we're talking about enabling the capability for your systems to have 24/7. We're enabling your capability, business capability, to do X, Y, or Z. You know what I mean? Like, IT is an enabler. IT helps the business accomplish what they need to. So moving on, I could talk like this for hours, and you guys could too.
Likewise.
For those unfamiliar, how does this book fit into the broader ITIL 4 curriculum? How does it do that?
I'll let you take that one.
Well, you know, the structure of ITIL has changed overall. So we have a number of components. The books that we're talking about here are not the same as the books you would have been familiar with in version 3 or 2 or even 1. What happened to those books, what we call processes or disciplines, if you like, is that they were basically put online and they're now called practices. And those are online. You subscribe to them. They're updated at least once a year, so they keep current with industry practice. But the issue was always, okay, so you've got all of these processes or practices. How do you combine them? How do you work with them? How you know, in most of the things we do in an organization, we're not just doing one practice. We're actually interfacing and using elements of multiple practices at the same time. You know, for example, incident, you know, feeds into problem management. Problem and incident management are involved with change management. You know, depending on what you're doing, you'll use different combinations of activities, right? So the books in version 4, the published books, are more about, you know, what you do with all of these practices, how you use them within managing an organization. And the scope is very different. I think in version 3, it was still very much, how do you manage an IT department? In version 4, it's very much, how do you manage a technology-enabled organization? Mm-hmm. And it involves both business and IT. In fact, we say both. Of course, they're all coming together now. It involves development. It involves operations. You know, no secret, ITIL, when it was first written, was purely for the operations environment. Mm-hmm. But those two environments have now started to merge together, and they're now incorporated into business units themselves. Very difficult to separate them all out. And so the books that we're talking about really had to deal with those. So we have the practices, which are the sort of building blocks, if you like, the raw materials, and then they're online. You subscribe to them through My ITIL. The books, which tell you how you use those practices to manage different aspects of the business, or of the organization, I should say. And then you have a number of supplementary guides, books, materials that are going to be added along the way that are not part of the core of ITIL, but are certainly there to help expand on how you use it. So for example, they're planning a volume, a published book for, how do you use these practices to manage cloud services if you're a cloud customer. That will be published within another year. So, it's not the end, it's ongoing. But the core, what we're used to in ITIL is now called My ITIL, and it's all online.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to interrupt you there. Several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote a book, ITSM in the Cloud, another one, ITSM in Outsourced World, because these are the answers that people are trying to.
Correct.
Let me give an illustration, and you guys tell me how wrong it is, okay? Let's start it from there. So the practices in the service value chain, service value system, those are ingredients. And so these books are a recipe of how do we assemble these ingredients to create this outcome, whatever it is, whatever you're making. How do you use these in assembled? You bake them, however, and then we talk about how do we measure them? How do we create those outcomes? Is that a fair illustration, or am I way off?
Yeah, I think so. And so in the case of digital and IT strategy, you're assembling all of these raw ingredients, and the thing that you're making is a competitive organization or an up-to-date organization. Yeah. And by the way, this applies to government as well as commercial entities, as well as nonprofits. If you want your business to succeed, you have to be able to operate efficiently and with good quality, and you have to be able to offer something that your customers need. You have to be, whether you're a government entity or a private entity, it doesn't make any difference. You have to do what it is your stakeholders need you to do. And so the digital and IT strategy book helps you to define that and figure out how to do that using the raw materials. So that is a very good example.
And the cycles are getting smaller. The IT people meeting with the business once a year, that's not going to cut it in anymore today's world. Because think about those people that met with their business customers this past January. How much has changed between then and now? That's also why the iterative approach, getting into one of the guiding principles, is so important, is that we have to be able to make small adjustments for the bigger picture. Is that fair?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So right in the introduction of this book, we point out the fact that if innovation had not been so rapid right now and so game-changing, we probably wouldn't have had to write this book. And organizations could have gone on using waterfall, types of techniques and for forever. And they could have gone on with their annual, in fact, they could have even done 5-year strategic plans. It would have been fine. But the reality is innovation is hitting so quickly and it is so disruptive that if you're not changing and evaluating what you do at least 2, 3, 4 times a year, you're going to lag behind.
Yes.
So, and one of the big constraints in this was the reason why organizations would keep their strategy cycle to a year was because that was the budget cycle.
Yes.
And, the strategy and budget cycles are all aligned. Well, now you're moving to on-demand kind of services through the cloud. Your strategy is a very flexible, your budget is a very flexible and fluid concept. And so is your strategy. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. Somewhere in the book, there's a diagram which shows how the cycles are shortening.
Yes.
And what happens as well when you start shortening your cycle is the number of initiative increases,
yes,
but they're reduced.
Yes.
They're shorter.
Yes.
And that's because they're iterative, as you point out. So the world of DevOps, unavoidable. We kind of saw it coming in version 3, but it wasn't mainstream yet. It was there, and there were some people using it, but we weren't sure where it was going to go. Well, now we know where it went, so it's there. And so that's how organizations. So to deal with this increase in innovation and shorten strategy cycles, organizations have to flatten in structure, They have to be far more iterative. They have to be a lot more agile, small a. You know, they have to be able to respond very quickly and move very quickly. And yes, they have to integrate their build and run cycles. There's just no way around that. So a lot of these things have happened simply because of the way the industry has changed.
I appreciate that you use the small a for agile, because I end up overusing the word nimble just to try to find some word that I didn't have to do. So, hey, Mark, what would you say that to pile on to that?
Yeah, there's a couple things. As I try to explain a little bit of ITIL 4 internally, I like to look at it like the various Star Wars movies, whereby you saw the story, you followed it, and then the next movie came out, which gave you insight as to more about what happened in the first episode. And then it built it. And then the other part that kind of comes to mind is, wow, just drew a blank. What was I thinking there? I had that analogy, and then I had, wow. It'll come back to me. But I mean, I was following what David's saying. I know what it was. And David probably said this in a prior podcast somewhere where I heard it, where in the beginning, when you looked at the ITIL books, you know, it was people trying to get together to show how they solved something, to provide insight, to provide guidance. This is how we did it, and we didn't fail. And build on that. And as you provided that guidance, and then as you went, the next release would perfect the, you know, insights from the prior release, but then also what's currently going on today, and then what can we see a little bit around the corner. I mean, we're not going to predict the future, but we understand where things are today, and based on some guidance, we can help you with that cloud. We can help you with, you know, how you're changing probably more towards a managed service provider than you were the IT shop. Yes. And now you're all the assets that you've been building up. I mean, when COVID hit, that was the other thing. When we're writing a book, we're like, holy cow, we got to make sure we cover a little bit for what COVID provide. All those investments now become almost like weapons or assets that help you go to the market and make things happen for your customers. And what I really liked about the ITIL 4 approach is it's a fresh perspective. Yeah. It builds on what's already there. You don't have to, you know, we used to upgrade all our machines. It was an expensive process, you know, the rip and replace. No, this builds on and takes you to the next level and leverage what you've already done, and then take you further into how you're competing in the market today.
Yeah, and allows you to take a bigger picture. Here's some scenarios, and we don't even need to address them, but just for context. How do I get these kind of calls? How do I do change management in DevOps? Because my compliance regulations haven't changed. So I've solved that a few times. I'm sure you guys have too. Or how do I handle cloud as an asset? You know, because I have this cloud instance, how do I handle that as an asset? And so all of this is moving in a direction that we have to see it with new eyes. We cannot see it as whatever I can barcode's an asset. No, that's not the thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, and something that Mark said as well, it's something that's really important. I think that I just wish more people would realize about ITIL. Just stop expecting it to be a prescriptive framework, because it really isn't. It was never written that way. It was simply, as Mark pointed out, there was people who got together and said, what has worked? Let's document it, because nobody's done that before. So they documented it. As a result, you know, they called it a best practice. Now, there's a lot of debate about that word, whether it's best or good or not good enough or whatever. It really doesn't matter. The point is, it's practice-based. It's not a framework. It's practice-based. It's like, we needed to manage our IT infrastructure. What did we do? Here are some things that really worked for us. Oh, that's cool. Well, if you use those things, you become better at doing them. And over time, new practices will emerge. And of course, what will happen is ITIL will say, because it's refreshed every 5 years or so, it will say, oh, that's great. See how this has evolved. Let's update the practices to show how things have evolved. So ITIL at best is really just it's a measure of how far the industry has grown over a certain amount. It's kind of baseline for where the industry is at a particular point. Some of that does consist of some fairly good guidelines and even some prescriptive material where they can be sure of themselves. But here's the point. None of what's in ITIL was ever intended to be an absolute.
Correct.
And very often we find people who take that approach is like, tell me how to manage change in ITIL in a DevOps environment. You're already off to a losing start. The two are not the same thing.
Correct.
Do you need to manage changes? Yes, you need to manage them in a production environment. You need to manage them in a development environment, and you need to manage the cultural aspects of all of those, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you do it? Well, here's a piece from ITIL which says somebody needs to assess the change before you deploy it. Cool. Okay. How do we do that? Okay. Let's speak to the DevOps guys. What do they do? You know, let's put it together and let's work out how to make change management work for us.
Correct.
And I think that piece is very often missing within organizations. They're in wars with each other as to whether the DevOps people should be predominant, or practice, I should say, or whether the ITIL practice should be predominant. And they lose sight of the entire reason why they're having the discussion in the first place.
Yeah.
Yes. Because they're trying to meet a compliance goal.
Yeah, that's right. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that ITIL will foster healthy discussion and that people will stop looking to it for definitive prescriptive guidance that just tells them what to do no matter what, because they're not going to find it there.
I agree. And so I've written books, and one of mine was on business continuity, because I think service management and business continuity go together. And I called it the art of remaining continuous, because no two organizations are similar with risk or services, even if same industry, same size, just different leadership, different things. Same goes for this. Like, I've seen way too many organizations, when they define services, want to flip on the tool, like the tool is going to be able to define those services, and they can't. It's a finesse thing, not a brute force. And I think that's what you're saying. You know, when I say it's the art of, we can all go to the same paint store, get painting supplies, but you sure don't want me painting a picture, not even stick figures. And there are some really good artists that can use that same stuff to create something beautiful. And that's how I view service management and other things, is it's all on the craftsman that helps you sort it out, put things together, helps explain, here's the why, the capability, let us figure this out. Is that kind of how you were thinking that, David?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. It's input. It's something based on someone else's experience that they've done that has worked for them. Some good ideas. Let's think about those. Could those work for us? I've lost count of the number of times. We put flowcharts in the books. We stopped doing that now, but we put flowcharts in the books as illustrations of, what the steps are in a typical process. Well, you cannot imagine how many people will say, well, we're totally ITIL compliant because our process looks exactly the same as on page 31 of the, the service operation book. Well, that is going to fail because it wasn't written for you, Do some of the steps apply to you? Absolutely. You should probably log the incident. You should probably find out from the user who's calling you what the symptoms are. Absolutely. But how do you do that in your organization? No idea. There's a way you're going to do it that's very different from the way another organization is going to do it. And I hope the way these books are written in ITIL version 4, I think they're far more geared towards guiding people rather than giving them information that looks like they can just take and apply.
Yeah,
and to add to that, sorry to jump in, one of the things I really liked about the new books was the storyline along the sides. And I think what that did was it helps drive David's point about, okay, here's some guidelines and some things that worked in the industry. Oh, and here's a use case to the left that kind of helps understand how you could apply it to yourself, as opposed to, adopt it as a prescription, but apply it. And I really like the use case that they've done.
I was thinking of, so you all could tell, I think of illustrations. I was thinking, I enjoy whitewater rafting. And I enjoy having that man or woman in the back that's seeing this path. On different days, the water's up or it's down.
Yes,
so
sometimes
we still
it's really
need
cold.
them to help navigate the rocks. And that's what I think with this is this ITIL 4 is helping us navigate the rocks.
Yes.
It's going to look different in different places. but still there's some guidance of getting us from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Yes.
So go ahead, David. Did you want to
No,
say?
I was going to say, you used the word art, which I really like. This is not a science, not at this point.
It's too
I'm
fast.
pretty sure, yeah. So some of the universities will certainly take a lot of this material, have already started doing this and building scientific models around them.
Yeah.
But this is not scientific. This is based on experience, and it is therefore very much an art. It's how you apply it and in different contexts and situations. And so I really like that you used the word art.
I think of it. Thank you, but I just think of, because I've seen places that I expected more and there was less, and places I expected less and there was more.
Yeah.
And a lot of it had to do with the people who, the craftsmen involved. So how does this book equip people and organizations for success? And so I don't want to define it just IT, because that's part of what we're trying to get out of that box. How does it equip? How does it push that success forward? Mark, let's let you start this time.
Sure.
David could pile on to what you said.
Sure. It was interesting when we first started talking about it. I miss our Monday afternoon, or I think we also did Thursday afternoon discussions when we used to get together on a call and we'd work through who's working on what. And, and the key part was, when you look at this book, who's it for? Who's the audience? And recognizing that, we had the prior books that were already launched, so you kind of have that in mind. But basically the goal, as I understood, was to elevate that level of discussion. And it was to provide the aspiring leaders or leaders that are in a role that are looking for the right resources, but also to look at it through the lenses of ITIL, but yet it's a little further down the journey and a little higher up on the stack, meaning it's more strategic. It's looking at it from a broader perspective and being able to provide tools and guidance where you can open up the book in different sections, find the different models that we're talking about, the examples that we're talking about, whether it's, hosting a hackathon to try and drive innovation, or if it's, kind of looking at it from a strategic level across the organization in terms of how we play well together. And then also the influencing, working through, how can I help influence these ideas, for others to buy in so that we can jump in and take off with this new idea. So those were the first thoughts that came to mind. I'm sure David could finish the thought process, but those are the first couple ideas.
I have a couple of things to add. Well, not to add, maybe to amplify. I think probably the primary thing is a matter of mindset. Before you even get any of the individual techniques out of the book, and there are plenty in there, it's a matter of mindset. It's a matter of saying, we're in this for something very different than we used to be in it. Yeah. We're not an internal IT department delivering services to internal business units anymore. We're a digitally enabled organization that wants to be successful. And you have to change that mindset. I think more than any process, more than any tool, the one thing that you need for people to be successful is a sense of purpose. Yes. Right? They have to know where they're going. If everybody in the organization knows where they're going and they're all communicating that all the time, you almost don't need a process.
Correct.
In a way, right? And so what this book is about understanding, how do we define that purpose, and how do we communicate that purpose, and how do we make sure that that purpose is what we need it to be successful as an organization.
Love that.
That is what this book is about for me. And yes, there's some great techniques, and we talk about defining visions, and we talk about how you should go about creating a strategy, so-called document. It's no longer just a document, right? It's a collection of all kinds of artifacts nowadays. And how do you do that? So there's a lot of information about the how-tos and the techniques and so on, but over and above everything, it's a mindset that is focused on purpose.
And I like what you were saying there, and I'm trying to think how to capture and recount that back, because to me, most people in IT, even leaders, because they came up through the technical ranks, they can't get high enough, right? They can't see They can't get to that 10,000 feet to be able to see the broad estate. So they drill down in technology, which is great. You know, those innovations great, but we have to get up high enough, and we have to be able to have that overarching strategy discussion with our senior leaders so we can be aligned to them. And those two kind of work together. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah. So you're back to your self-licking ice cream again, right? Which is, as long as I can focus on managing the technology, and as long as that technology is critical for the business, even though I don't understand it, I will keep demanding more money so that I can keep managing it, right? And that keeps me in a job. Well, those days are kind of disappearing, right? Because the job of technology management, and in fact, the job of selecting technology, is now moving away from IT slowly, but it's moving. And organizations are starting to understand this. Now, of course, the issue that we have now is that, you know, a lot of business professionals who are seeing this exciting new technology in the cloud, and they're using it, and they're investing in it, suddenly start realizing that there are all kinds of technical management components and skills that they don't have, that they now have to go back and get from IT. So we've still got this very uneasy relationship, I think, in many organizations. But you're absolutely right. The way to stop the self-licking ice cream is to get those leaders high enough on both sides, so they can see over that wall and start understanding what it takes to be successful on both sides. And just an example, Mark and I worked in an organization a number of years ago, and you know, they had an issue with one of the it was factories in this case, and you know, said, come and help us understand what is going on here. So we went out there, we ran a workshop. It was great. We learned a whole lot of stuff.
Amazing workshop.
Yeah. What we found out, though, was that 80% of IT staff had not set foot in a factory, and that was their primary business.
Yeah.
Like, how do you provide services when you know, you don't have visibility of what's going on there? So yes, if we get those leaders elevated to the level and looking over those walls so that they can spend time in each other's worlds, it's and that's a lot of what this book is about. Yeah.
And that's why I'm all for consultancies that have seen it, done it, because unless you've lived with the consequences of what you're preaching, it's hard to preach. And I only say that, David, because you and Mark have lived this. But, you know, if you're an IT person, you're talking about offshore in the service desk, which is fine for organizations. But unless you've learned how to equip the knowledge management and all the pieces for that success, you're not going to be successful long term in terms of living with that decision, because it's an empirical decision that has long lasting effects.
Right.
Can I add
also,
one?
yeah, sorry, Mark.
Oh, no. I loved your example on the support not seeing the factory area. And I tried not to talk a whole lot about Motorola, but there was one part that was really cool. As an offer manager, Motorola has this exercise once a year where you get to go to a facility that trains firemen. And as part of it, you actually wear the fireman's outfit. You use the Motorola technology. You go through an exercise. I was signed up this year, supposed to do it in October. Unfortunately, with COVID, we had to cancel it, but they canceled it like 2 weeks. So for like 3 months, I was getting excited. I was a little nervous because they told me I had to shave my beard in order to wear the mask the way you're supposed to wear it. But to David's point about, you know, being in the shoes and seeing your, you know, technology, how it works. Now, when I come up with the next idea on how we should be merging this technology with this technology, I walked in their boots. I held the fire hose. I did that role. So now I've got a bit more understanding and excitement. So yeah, just to David's point about making sure that you're really plugged in, you understand the vision, the purpose, the mindset. Yeah, I just wanted to.
Yeah, especially since you're a service organization.
Yes.
I mean, like, your job is to help enable these outcomes. You have to know what those outcomes are.
Yes, yes. And getting a chance to participate in it gives you more insight.
Yeah. David?
I think Mark has raised a really good point. I'm going to go back to something else that you said, though. I'm hesitant to do that because that was such a good point. But, there's this thing about offshoring service desk, for example, and it comes back to something that Mark was saying as well. It's all very well you offshore certain components of what you do, or you put them into the cloud and so on. But if the things that service desk supports continuously change, how do you keep an offshored or outsourced component up to date and in sync?
Yes.
Hard. Very, very difficult. You can really only, I will come back to, we discuss this in the book, but you can only offshore or outsource something that is 100% commoditized.
Yeah.
If it's 100% commoditized, if it needs to evolve with your business, you have no business offshoring it.
Yeah, but I would even take it a step further. These people, and I've been a part of 2 organizations that did this, so I'm not throwing stones too far. But the people that offshore something and want to hold a vendor to an SLA they've never had internally developed or maintained or baselined.
Yeah. Yep.
If you're going to offshore it, you have to have that baseline, because if not, you're just going to a contract. And I have some sad news for folks. Those offshoring companies do this every day. You don't, and those contracts are not forgiving otherwise. So what's next for ITIL 4? ITIL 4 I know that it's been out over a year officially, but what's next? Because I still think it's still building and growing. COVID's kind of knocked it off a little bit. What's next?
Mark, you're waiting, but I think you should take this.
Well, from my understanding, and this is, and I could be wrong, but this is how I explained it internally. If you notice, like Windows 10, there's no Windows 11, 12, 13 coming. It's 10 where they're continuously providing patches and slowly giving you new feature functionality, but it's still Windows 10, right? And it's been going on for a few years now. And I think with the ITIL 4, they kind of rebranded things. So it's ITIL 4, that's its brand. And then with the My ITIL logon to be able to get the white papers and see the updates to the various practices. I see it continuing to evolve what's there. And then I see it adding incrementally, like new features. We talked about the cloud, what's the best practices to, initiate technology in the cloud. Well, someone will put together that and share that. And I think more of those sort of things will start to happen. And now, it's a subscription to keep current is where I see. But
so
David,
what I heard you say is it's like Windows 10 without the blue screen of death on back.
Yeah. Well played.
Yeah, everything in ITIL 4 is pink. So pink.
Yeah.
So that's what it'll be. But I tend to agree. I think this has got a lot more obsolescence built into it, if I can put it that way, and that we have the online subscription piece. So the practices will be updated a lot more frequently. And so, as the industry changes, because it is changing, we're not going to get away from that. Whatever we wrote today is not going to be valid in 5 years' time. It will need to be updated, but at least with the practices being updated, that is going to be able to sustain itself much longer. The question about what's next, it all depends on what's next in the industry. Where's the industry going to go? To what extent is DevOps and operations management, pure and simple, going to merge and become something completely different? If that happens, it's not in the current version of ITIL. That will have to be added. It'll have to be re-architected to define that. And so the question is not really what's next for ITIL. It's really what's next for the industry. Where's the industry going to go from here? What is artificial intelligence going to do? Machine learning, etc. What is that going to do to organizations and the skills that are needed to manage technology? In fact, are we even going to have IT departments in future? Right? We don't know the answers to that. I think, in 5 years' time, you'll be able to look back and say, wasn't it obvious? I mean, we look back now at version 3 and say, wasn't the cloud obvious? Yeah. Back in version 3, we thought the cloud was a really good way of provisioning or procuring capacity. That was it.
Yeah.
we didn't see how organizations were going to take it and innovate with it and go, to the nth degree and shift the entire industry and the way the industry worked. We didn't know that at the time. Now we know it, and so we write about it. But so what's it going to be like in 5 years' time when these technologies that are just being innovated right now are going to come into full swing? What's it going to be like after the pandemic? What's that new normal going to look like, and how do we manage? Is it still going to be work from home predominantly? Is it going to be a combination of that in the office? What kind of technologies are we going to need to support the workforce in future? We still don't know the answers to those questions. So will ITIL in its current form be able to help us answer those questions and move organizations forward? I don't know yet, but that's what it all depends on.
Yes, and to use your point, I think back in technology, all those people that got stuck with beta because they were betting on the wrong horse,
Yes.
or so many things like that. It's one that I see from what you all are saying, ITIL 4 being reactive to what's going on and trying to use that to enable outcomes for business purposes. How can we help further that down the road?
Right. And part I wanted to add to David's point about the cloud and how startups now the playing field is leveled.
Yes.
Like before, the barrier of entry was expensive. You had to buy a server, you had to buy OS, you had to do this, you had that, and you had all this investment before you could really start. Now a startup, it's almost like the teenage garage bands. You get a few people together in a room that have a great idea and want to build it. It's not difficult to spin up the power of a virtual machine and any of the platforms, Azure, Amazon, or wherever, and then it has all this power that you can string together, red thread together some amazing capabilities that somebody's willing to subscribe to.
Yeah, to take that a step further, for the ITSM world or ITIL world, that app that they're selling that goes on your phone,
Yes.
now has to go through those same practices and be seen through that lens where, a few years ago, that was the ancillary piece, and now that's the main piece.
Yeah. There's a Spotify use case, I think, on my ITIL that talks about that. It's a good one to take a look at.
I will say something. I'll add something else, and this may be a little bit provocative. I don't mean it to be, but I will say that I think that both ITIL and DevOps and Lean, and in fact, any of these that have come into play over the last, that have started to merge over the last 5 years, have all brought their own weaknesses into the mix. And I think I think we're going to start seeing what those weaknesses are. I mean, for example, not a single one of them has properly defined the integration into enterprise strategy. They may argue that they do, but if you really look at how they're done in practice, they really have not. And so, again, it remains to be seen if the digital and IT strategy book will help to overcome those shortcomings in all of those historical approaches, right? And I know there are people from each of them who are very passionate about it, said, yes, but we use it as part of our strategy, but that is not mainstream. Right. It is certainly not built in. It wasn't what many of these things were designed for. They were designed for efficiency, or they were designed for enabling teams to work together better, or they were designed to integrate, build and run environments, or they were designed to help create and develop products a lot quicker and easier. But there are a lot of things that they don't do. And as I say, one of them is the effective linkage to enterprise strategy, and automation of that strategy, in fact. Right. And I'd like to see that changing. I don't know, I'd like to see that come into future versions of ITIL. So, yeah.
Even automation, period, right? And not to go back on an ITIL V3 thought process, but if you have garbage in, garbage out, if you have garbage in and you automate it, you're going to have garbage out. And
just faster.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. A lot of people talk about value streams right now. Of course, value streams have been around in one form or fashion in all of these methodologies and frameworks, service models, value streams, or whatever you call them. But the interesting thing about value streams is that still today, in spite of all the hype around them, they're not going far enough to where the value is being realized.
Yes.
They're all focused on the internal activities and what we do to produce the value, but they're not focused on what happens after the chain. What's the next step? So, I'm starting to talk about the plus one value chain, one plus value chain plus one. Look one step further up from the value chain to see what's coming in. Look one step further down from the value stream, rather, to see what the outcome was that was actually achieved after the value stream was in fact successful. And was it in fact successful?
Right.
So I think there's a lot of that kind of work that needs to be done. And just taking all of these approaches that are now blending and harmonizing and coming together, and start taking them just that one step further, so that we overcome their limitations and constraints that they currently have.
I'm with you there, because A, we don't intake very well and understand the problem we're trying to solve. And B, we don't do the early production support, early life support, whatever you want to call it, for whichever methodology. We don't do that well with criteria and metrics. And then from there, be able to hand it off and gain feedback for the next iteration. We just don't do that well. And, documenting lessons learned and all that fun stuff, we just don't do very well. So I'm always thinking about collaboration. And so whenever I've worked on group projects, there's always this interesting dynamic. So how did you guys get to, in this book, get an outline, have it finalized, and content get distilled down? Everybody's got an opinion. And so here's the, I heard this principle the other day, and I know that yours isn't like this, but most of my projects been like that. They call it the ice cream principle, where if you have 10 people and I send you to the store and I say, I don't care what flavor of ice cream that you want to get me a big gallon of, but all 10 of you have to agree, it's always vanilla or chocolate, because it's the lowest common denominator. And that's how it is in mine, is that we bring it down. So how did you guys lift that back up and have such a great product?
It was very interesting. So this, having been involved in previous versions, I have the luxury of being able to compare. This was extremely collaborative compared to previous versions. We had a lot of input, a lot of discussion. And so the Axelos team was very involved, very hands-on. They're all subject matter experts in their own right. Phenomenally smart and experienced people that were involved from that side. From our side, we had a team of, I think, 6 or 7 authors. And as Mark pointed out earlier, every week we'd get on there, we'd discuss things, like disagree with one another, pull holes in arguments, correct what we thought was incorrect thinking, and only to find out that your thinking was the incorrect thinking, and having to change it. I will say that for myself, going into the project with what I thought I knew, what I walked out of that project with actually knowing was very different. It challenged my thinking on so many levels. You're not getting vanilla here by any means. You're really getting everything that is in that book was challenged. It was gone over first by the author team. It was then submitted, and I would sit every single week for a few hours with the Axelos team, going over what we'd written and why we'd written it, and have them put it to pieces and give their point of view. And it was very interesting, very growthful. I want to say painful, because it wasn't always pleasant. It really wasn't. It was incredibly enriching, I think, to be part of that, just personally, just what I learned. And I'm speaking for myself here. Of course, Mark knew it all already when he got onto the project, but
I learned a ton, a lot of research.
But it was, I think, to a person on this project, the attitude was, we're here to learn, we're here to understand what others have done, and we're here to try and put that in a way that really is gonna, is really going to be beneficial to the people that are going to read this book. Yeah.
And it was a safe environment too, so that we could go at each other pretty hard if we needed to. But knowing at the end of the day, still having a beer together, still enjoying your time together, and still learning from each other. I wanted to add, Dave, can you talk about the outline? You know, I when I was talking to Jeffrey earlier, it was a lot like, you know, it was Abraham Lincoln that said, if you give me X amount of time to chop down a tree, I'd spend 90% of it sharpening the axe. And I think if you talk about sharpening the axe and you look at the outline, the table of contents, how much time you spent to...
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. It's very surprising. We spent just on getting the table of contents together. Well, it was a syllabus and a table of contents. The syllabus, because they said, what would we like people to learn from this book? So they created a syllabus. That was the starting point. And then from that, it was a table of contents. And I want to say it took us probably close to 6 months to define that table of contents. You know, and obviously it wasn't just words. There was there was a little bit of description underneath each one. But honestly, it was, we started writing in earnest in February.
Yeah.
The book itself was written very quickly. It was from February until June, it was done.
Yeah.
But creating the outline, the table of contents and the syllabus was literally went from, I want to say
July to...
Yeah, it was July to pretty much the December.
December, January. Yeah.
Wow. And so you mentioned the friction, the positive friction. I think of the iron sharpening iron. There's always friction. That's what makes it sharper. And having a safe place to do that. So how did you decide what to keep and what to toss out? And not on a personal level, but you know, different people have different ideas. How did that, who got to make that call?
Well, it's an interesting story. I would say that for the most part, each person got a piece that they had to write. It was pretty much theirs. And I think Mark wrote a whole section, innovation, and then also collaborated with some of the other authors. Chris Gallagher from Forrester was one of them, and then Richard DeCock from Microsoft. Then there was a bunch of people from Beyond 20. So Erica Flora was lead editor together with me. David Crouch and Brian Flora were involved as well. So just to name some, drop some. Did I miss anyone?
No, I think you...
Okay. So yes, so there was some collaboration there, but each of those individuals got to write a section that was theirs. Not much was changed in there except to kind of write it in a similar voice. That was my job. I was one of the 2 lead editors, and my job was really to write everything in the same voice, to get it all into one place. And so to some extent, yes, the job of what to include or exclude fell to me for the first pass. However, the final decision was made by Axelos. And that decision, I believe, was really made by Roman Zhurevlev, who is the lead architect for this, and he did a really good job, I have to say, in taking some of the things out. Some of us weren't too happy about what he took out because it was stuff we'd worked hard on, but actually I think the overall product was really good. So yeah, there were at least 2 passes of things being taken out. One by us at an author level, then one by me as an editor level, and then one by Axelos with Roman, and then Akshay Anand as well was involved in that. They then refined it further. I would have to say the final version looks a little bit different than what we submitted, but not too bad. You know, nothing too important was taken out.
I like to equate it to when they film movies. You know, they're filming all these different scenarios, you know, talking about different areas, and then you know, a lot of the film ends up on the showroom floor, and then the final product is a very crisp, clean, well thought through, everything's connected, one voice. So pretty proud of what was the final product.
Came together well.
Yeah, not only the one voice, but the writing style. You know, the writing style and the ability to make it flow like it's not hodgepodged or quilted together, but it's one garment.
Yeah, that was very challenging. In some cases, it meant I did have to rewrite things, and I had to rewrite it in a way that did not change what the author was saying, but that it at least flowed with what was before and after. I'd like to think I got it right probably about 80% of the time.
Well, I would say as one of the authors, that's the genius of working with David Cannon. He can talk to each one of us, understand what we're trying to do. We put it in writing, and then he just threads it through the rest of the story. It was brilliant. I think that's where the genius comes in.
Well, you call it genius. I think it's the appreciation of storytelling, right? It's the love of a good mystery or spy thriller.
There
right?
you go.
That's what it's about. If you enjoy that, then you want to see a story like that coming through in a book like this. Now, clearly, this is not as thrilling as that.
Sure.
But nonetheless, I'd like to think that there is that thread that flows through, that you really do want it not only just to contain pieces of information that are useful, but you want it to tell a story, and you want that story to be, hey, your business or your organization is entering an entirely different world. How are you going to be successful? Yeah. That's the story that we're trying to tell.
Right. Exactly.
And so let's move from the ITIL 4 deep weeds. But now let's talk, there's a lot of organizations, 90-something% of them, that are still set up on V3. How do you recommend, without going too deep, right? Because this could take hours for us to go. How do you recommend them making that transition to ITIL 4, especially because they have organizational design that way, they have ITSM tooling that leads them that way, they have personnel, how do you all recommend?
I could tell you how I'm starting it, and then David could. So it'll be interesting to see if my fellow teammates listen this far into the podcast.
We'll find out, won't we?
Yeah. But it starts by educating. It starts by getting them familiar with, level setting. Where are we at? What do we have today? What do we like? What do we want to change? There's a lot of that's already happening through maturity growth and the way the business is changing. And so now the approach is start to introduce, several people have already done the foundations, ITIL 4 foundations, because that pretty much started since, it was launched, and anyone who went to training got ITIL 4 foundations. So I think that's a good start. And then getting the common nomenclature. And now, as we start to introduce the concepts and ideas and working through that. So internally, from a practice, I'm going to be scheduling regularly scheduled brown bag sessions to take topics and work through them and see how we can apply them.
I was waiting for Mark, for you to mention the guiding principle. We're going to start where we are.
Exactly.
That's
start
what
where we
I
are.
was waiting for. Not to bait you or anything.
No. You're perfect. You're well, and that'll be one of the first slides we show them is the guiding principles. Yeah, and starting to use that.
Yeah, I want to say that first off, there is no point in migrating to version 4 from version 3. If that's your starting point, please stop right there, right? That is not what you need to be doing. Let me just say that if you're doing things that you got out of version 3, they're probably working well for you. You've probably adapted them. You've probably made them work for your organization, and they're probably working pretty well. There may be some updates that you can tweak in version 3. You could use those updates to tweak what you've already done, but please keep using them and keep letting them do what they're good at doing. Don't throw those things out and continue to use them. What version 4 will bring, I think, again, is this perspective, this mindset of we're more than just IT people. So I think a number of years ago, I spoke at a conference and I said the theme was, what is the future of ITSM? And I said, well, the future of ITSM is one of 3 places. It is in the business, or it's in the basement where you came from, managing the technology that you own, or it's in the cloud because you've been outsourced. It's one of those 3. Now, if you want to be in the basement, or if you want to be outsourced into the cloud and become a cloud service provider, those are very valuable technical skills, and they're absolutely going to continue to be needed, but they're not service management, right? By all means, if you want to stick into just managing incident management, if you want to just be a service desk analyst or a service desk supervisor, service desk director, by all means, continue doing what you're doing and provide some minor tweaks. Nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
The change is going to come where you start implementing a lot of the service management principles beyond what you've already done.
True.
Right? And it's when you start extending those into the rest of the business. So some people are talking about ESM. Some people are talking about improved business relationship management, and getting out there. Some people are talking about better service architecture.
Mm-hmm.
If those are the areas that you're moving into, don't even look at version 3.
True.
Go straight to version 4 and start growing from the guidance that you're going to get there. And then you can come back later and say, well, how does our service desk map into the service value chain, right? Yeah, okay, so here's where it does for create, deliver, support. This is kind of the role that it plays. Yeah, okay, we can tweak and adapt that to this new way of managing things, but it has to be evolutionary. Do
Correct.
not, whatever you do, just stop what you're doing, throw it away, and start from scratch with an ITIL v4 implementation. That is not going to help you.
Correct.
My opinion, right?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think just educating them on what's new and how it can be tweaked is exactly the
right.
The awareness.
And so to your point, Mark, I think a really good starting point for that is get everybody through the foundation, let them see what it's about, let them see what's coming, and let them participate in figuring out how we're going to take that service desk to the next level. If that's what's required. How are we going to commoditize incident management a lot more and automate it a lot more so that we can focus more on those higher level things that people are demanding from the business?
Yes, the value.
Yeah.
And on this to me, it's a lot bigger of a change than ITIL V2 to V3, which just shifted from internally focused to externally focused. IT-centric to business-centric, but organizations now are designed according to V3. We talked about it, they outsource the operations, transitions, a lot of compliance, but it doesn't incorporate a lot of the organization. They're just doing it remotely. And so, how do they now transition to ITIL 4? And you all said that, transition very carefully, but it's a step.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the things that we spoke about in version 3 was this whole service management office thing.
Mm-hmm.
Had people done that, the service management office would be there to guide them through this transition. So yes, on one hand, I'd like to say, yes, a lot of people did structure their organizations according to what they read in version 3, but they did it selectively.
Yeah.
They used the structure of the books to structure their organization. We now have service delivery departments and service support departments. That isn't what the book said. The book said you need all of these processes. They need to run across multiple parts of the organization, but you need a service management office, some sort of coordinating body at the top to make sure that it's running across every part of the organization that it should be, right? Instead of trying to create more silos. Mm-hmm. And I think what happened is, people said, oh, there's service delivery, service support. We need to have departments called that. It was never the intention. So I'm sorry, but for those who've ended up with those kind of departments, let's go back a few steps and let's go back to your service management office. And I'm not talking about a project management office. I'm talking about a governance mechanism.
Yes.
You don't have to call it a service management office either, by the way. You can call it what you like, but it's a governance mechanism which says, here's how processes and practices are used in this organization, and here's who does them, and this is when we do them, and this is why we do them. Let's go back and re-architect that, and then let's figure out what the best structure is to achieve what purpose it is we've set for ourselves, rather than organizing yourself around what process you have to manage.
Right. I'm with you. I'm with you.
Sorry if that sounds a bit harsh, but I find we've gotten ourselves into a corner here, in many cases, that we should never have gotten into, and it comes from an inaccurate reading of the materials in some cases.
Yes, and I think it's a lack of leadership's understanding of what service management should be. Because let me reframe, and then I'll pass it on to Mark. One of the conversations I've had recently, they said, we don't use a CAB anymore, we use a change authority. I'm like, that is what a CAB is.
Absolutely.
It's like I'm a dad, but I'm also a parent. They can be the same. And, like we want to jump in both feet on this vernacular so we could be, mainstream, and they're missing the underlying, here is whatever you call it. You can call a dog a cat, but it's still a dog, right? And
yeah, and that, yeah, sorry, we're going to go to Mark now, but you've raised one of the points that is a very hot button. CAB was never intended for every single change, never. It was intended for a very specific category of change that needed collaboration from multiple groups within the organization to be able to plan, and because it was so big and so important. That was what the CAB was for. The CAB was never designed for those who wanted to do fairly standardized sort of changes or small scale changes within the organization. And I think, where this idea came from, that the CAB, you had to bring every single change, no matter how big or small, into the CAB. Where they came from, I don't know. And yet then ITIL is bureaucratic. Right.
And it's not.
But it wasn't.
But that's why it's an art, David. That's why it's an art. And it's the painter. Because where I was last, we went to a local CAB. We had an enterprise and then had smaller for business unit CABs.
Right.
This is a framework that are just colors of paint for the artist. And Mark, will kick it to you. We've interrupted you twice.
No. I did want to kind of defend a little bit those that did set up service strategy, service design, service transition. I think when you started out with the ITIL 3, those kind of made sense if you were building kind of a new organization to try and address, or at least categorize what you're doing. I think those were a good starting point. But I think if you've seen those organizations that did that, although they may still have the label service transition, service design, underneath, they've all evolved and changed. And if you go back and you say, okay, is it like the book? Probably not. But the title and the name and the process and the activities that are being done within each of those areas have evolved over time. And maybe now, to Dave's point, maybe now is the time to relook at that, reevaluate it, and see that, is it still what we originally? Probably not, because the business is expanded and grown and taken on new challenges and new approaches and adopted different ways of doing things. But I know that many organizations, to Dave's point, did set up their organizations in that manner, but then didn't follow through, or they tried to go to the letter of the law and it failed because it wasn't set up for them. And they probably defended themselves in the internal arguments. Well, the book says this. And they're like, no. The book provided guidance to give you direction on, what would be a viable approach. From this point forward, it's up to you to adapt it for the business, because we can't do the last mile, as they would say in telco. We can't handle the last mile. It's up to you to get the last mile. So I just wanted to at least give a counterbalance to David's point, but yet still agree with, it wasn't what it was intended, but those that did, I could see why. And those that have evolved, now it's time to reevaluate. Now you're reevaluating. Why not take a look at what ITIL 4 brings to the table? Also, maybe you just need to sharpen your skills on where you're at today.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I was maybe a little bit harsh. I would say, if you are going to reorg, and if you are going to change the names of your department, change it to something that your business needs you to do.
Yes.
Not what ITIL told you need to, classify. It's like, what does your organization need you to do? That's what you should call your department.
Well, and at the same time,
capabilities, right? Services, capabilities, things of that nature, not this other. So we're on this path. So what tangible tactical steps can people put in? And we've talked about some of them, but this is a loaded question. To move down that path, what can they've taken this organization? So like take service improvement, CSI, continual improvement, whatever we want to call it, right? Like I said, we call it dog a cat. It's still a dog. But how do we put that into practice? How do we put in all these other things that we, ITIL 4 talks about governance. How do we help move organizations in that direction? You
have to change the conversations that you're having. If you're not busy talking at senior business leadership level, you have to get there quickly. You have to start having these more strategic discussions. And so, those IT groups that are really starting to, and I'm not just talking about development work, right? I'm really talking about the management work.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about helping to define the direction of the company, the initiatives, not only company, but of the organization, initiatives that they're needing to undertake to be competitive and successful. It's having those discussions. And I would say one of the very first things that should be done, if it's not already being done, is start getting those communication channels in place. Start making friends with business leaders. I'm talking about business unit, line of business heads. I'm not talking about, sort of middle managers and supervisor levels. They have a perspective. This communication needs to be taking place at the most senior levels of management within the organization. I would say that is probably the biggest priority for organizations before they even think about what's going on with their processes and practices and structure and so on, because that's where the governance comes from. It comes from the directors, from the executives of the organization. If you're not hooked into that, it's going to be very, very difficult to provide a technology management function that complies with the needs of the organization.
That are moving.
Yeah, absolutely.
That are moving, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can assume that your dev teams and your DevOps teams are hooked into a part of the organization that is taking them in the right direction, but that's no guarantee. Right? You can't assume that your entire future as an IT group within the organization is simply dependent, as it was in the old days, on somebody in a business unit telling you what they want you to do. That's not strategic at all. And what that will end up with is, as a service manager, you'll end up in the basement or the cloud. You will not end up in the business, right?
With a red stapler.
With a red,
value co-creation. But
no, absolutely.
ITIL 4 vernacular, you're talking about value co-creation, right?
Absolutely. And you have to have visibility of where the value is not only being created, but where it is being realized.
Yes.
You have to know where that is. You have to be in the front lines of that. If you're not present in those spaces, it's very difficult for you to have a voice.
I saw this quote the other day. IT demonstrates value when it enables business outcomes, not when they report efforts, expanded resources consumed, or work done.
True.
I saw that the other day. I wrote it down. I'm like, bingo. Right? Pretty much says it.
Yep.
Doesn't matter how much you spent or how hard you worked. It doesn't matter that, because value is only in the eye of the beholder.
And willing to pay for it.
Yep.
Right.
So it's very simple. I mean, as first step, if you're not doing this already, get out of your office, go down to where the factory floor is, or whatever your equivalent to the factory floor is. Go and spend some time there. Go and speak to those people. Go and speak to those managers. Go and speak to those business unit leads. Spend your time there. It is, again, when everybody in the organization has the same understanding of their purpose, the rest falls into place.
Yes.
And I think we've not spent enough time doing that. We spent too much time focusing on how to manage the technology and what the best practice is and so on. Not enough time focusing on how we get everybody talking the same language. So to me, that's the most tangible and beneficial next step that needs to be taken.
And just to add to that, as the most exciting part of product management, when you're designing software and you're putting together all these use cases and you go to the customer site, they don't know who you are, and you see your technology on their screen and they're using it, and you see how, and you ask if you could just watch how they use it without telling them that you were the product manager to put that together. And then the second part is seeing your product in another language, like in Japanese or in Chinese, or and using your product. So to the same point, getting out on the shop floor, seeing how things are done, and trying to figure out what it is that you do that creates the value for them to want to continue to use your product and keep going forward.
Oh yeah. And so if we start wrapping up, this is a loaded question, fair warning. I ask Katrina McDermott this. She was our first guest on this podcast in July. I asked David Radcliffe this from Pink, the same question. So I'm asking you guys, loaded question. They both they ducked it and took a pass. But I think you guys will take this one. What do you predict ITIL 5 will look like? Kat said, just so you'll know, she said, I don't know. I hope to be living in the south of France on the beach one day by then. David said, I don't know. And so what do you all think ITIL 5 will look like?
I think David started to answer it. It depends on what the industry does. It depends on where the industry takes us. What that new leap in technology and approach is going to take us. I agree with David on that. I'll let him add beyond that, but that's the first.
I may be a little bit, maybe it's optimistic, or I don't know how you'd interpret this. For me, if I read the trends right, what we're doing is we are moving the traditional IT department out of the picture.
Yes.
We're either outsourcing them or we are moving some of that functionality or that manageability into the business unit itself. How quickly that happens will determine whether version 5 looks like this. But to me, version 5 is a manual for business leaders on how to manage the technology that is part of their business unit.
Wow.
That's what I think. Right.
That's interesting. One of our guests about a month ago, a guy named Joe DeConti, he's Senior Director of Enterprise Service Management for PepsiCo. And his Enterprise Service Management group, and think of CMDB and everything else, sets in between the business and IT, which I think is an awesome place to be when we're, along your thought there, David, of how we're moving. I thought that was was an awesome place to be.
I don't know how quickly we'll get there. I think there will be an interim stop where there will still be that middle office. That's what Michael McGahey, a friend of mine, called it, the middle office. It's the one that sits between the business and the techies. I think there may well be something like that, a broker of technology services, while those technology services are still very specialized. As they become less and less specialized, though, the technology management skills will go into the service providers, and those will be external, and the technology utilization skills will stay within the business, and those will be managed within the business units themselves. Whether we'll still have a CIO in the same role at that point, I don't know. And that'll be interesting. Yeah. I think the CIO may be more of a strategic role, more of an architectural role, than a hands-on technology management role.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then I think that's what ITIL 5 will cater for. And again, I think there's no reason it shouldn't, because that is where the technology is trending right now.
Well, and to your point, I know Mark's chomping at the bit, but to your point there, think about a data center. People used to have internal data centers with people that manage them. Now, not so much, right? Because they outsource it to Microsoft, to Amazon, to Google's, let their data center people manage those, and you just manage the output, which is the cloud instance. And you're saying, David, that you see IT looking like that at a bigger scale. Is that fair?
Yeah, but I think that's fair. Now, I may have gone to an extreme on that point of view. Mainly to prove the point, but I definitely think, no, look, the other alternative is that ITIL itself stays on the technology management side, and it becomes the management framework used by cloud service providers or data center
managed services
vendors, or managed service providers. Yeah, exactly. So, it could go either way, but I honestly feel the way it's trending right now, it is going to be more of a business view on how do we harness technology and not fall into the traps of, that were made by, technology managers in the past, of being beholden to the technology, right? So that we can grow our business, so that we can move our business to where it needs to go.
I wanted to double click on one of your points, the service broker. I know that when we were at HP, that was something that we were really exploring for a while, was this broker concept of you understand your business and you also understand the technologies that are out there. And it's your service broker role to make sure that as the technology is evolving, you're taking an advantage and providing for your business the best possible solution to be successful at the right cost.
Right.
Kind of looking at that balance and being able to, this was the right technology at the moment, but then this new technology can do this plus this at this price point, being able to broker over and the business doesn't have to think about it. They just do what they do and keeping it together.
Yeah, and that model really works well in two conditions. One is there's multiple different business units doing different things, but who need to use similar technology. So they need somebody to get a centralized vision of that, and that's a broker. And the second thing is the broker has knowledge that the customers do not.
Yes.
Specialized knowledge. Now, if the knowledge transitions to the business units, there's no need for that role from the service broker. If the governance structures that you have in place are working well within a distributed environment, there is no need for the first one either. And so the two conditions for having a business broker model, for having a service broker model, are therefore not being met. And therefore, the business is quite capable of taking on the role of brokering or acquiring its own services, provided there is enough coordination between all of the business units that are needing technology services. So,
at the governance,
I'm not saying that is practically possible or feasible right now. I'm just pointing out that things are trending in that way. And right now, I think every IT department is providing some brokering service of some kind, whereas maybe 10 or 15 years ago, they were not.
Correct.
Now they are. How long that'll go on for, I don't know.
Correct. I agree.
This has been an awesome conversation. I've enjoyed it. We're going to have you guys back after the first year.
Anytime.
And talk about some more things. So let's ask you all, for the audience. So I'm sure they want to get in touch with you guys. How do they get in touch with each one of you all?
Well, sorry, Mark, you go ahead.
I was going to say, you can go first.
Well, for me, just reach out by email. I'm on LinkedIn, David Cannon, Cannon. My email is dcannon@infinity3.com. I won't spell that. If you get a hold of me on LinkedIn, you can get a hold of me. Twitter is Itil SO from the first book. But really, LinkedIn, I think, is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. And please do, questions, comments, or if you disagree violently with anything I've said, please do. You're welcome. Very open to hearing your thoughts.
Discourse is good. How about you, Mark?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn as well. Mark E. Bradley, I believe is the way I set it up. And then I do have a Twitter account that I dabble with, Cisco Kid 87. It was from my first job out of college was Cisco Foods, and the ad was, "We need a computer whiz kid," and I showed up and said, "I'm that kid." And they said, "Okay, you're the Cisco Kid."
For our audience that may not be old enough to remember who that is, Mark, do you want to enlighten them?
So there was the famous Cisco, and was it Cisco and Pancho?
Yes.
Yeah. It was a TV show that used to be on Fox on Sunday afternoons.
Black and white, right?
Black and white, cowboy.
It was a different age back then.
I'm not old enough to remember that. Sorry.
I understand. David's not old enough. Mark, you can fill him in. You know, that gray beard, you can help him with that.
Yeah, and it's Cisco SYSCO. It was the food company, the food distributor that I worked for. So I took a twist on the Cisco Kid approach with that.
Gotcha. But it's been great having you all. Like I said, we'll have you back after the first of the year, and I thank you for your time. This hour and a half or whatever it's been has flown by, and as we talk shop. So thank you guys for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having
you, Jeffrey. Really appreciate it. Always great to catch up, David.
And we'll be right back with Jeffrey's closing thoughts. Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey, and I'm back with closing thoughts. I'm excited to talk to David and Mark and just all of their thoughts and what went into this DITS book and how ITIL and IT strategy are coming together. I'm still excited and jazzed from that conversation. It gives me a lot of food for thought. And how am I going to make that practical for those that rely on me, my clients, my customers, the people I talk to every day? So there are two things that jump out at me. First of all, it's a big leap from ITIL V3 to ITIL 4. And so it's going to take thought leadership. It's going to take you as leaders to think, how can I transform my organization from where it is now to where I want it to be? Because we're all set up under the ITIL V3 organization. That's number one. Number two is, and I want to say this is even more important, our metrics and how we measure have to change. With ITIL 4 incorporating DevOps and Agile, don't you think that if our deployment methods are changing, shouldn't our metrics? And the answer is yes. And so consider, even if your ITSM tool doesn't have these new metrics, this new capabilities, think about how to incorporate them. You'll be pushing your organization far ahead. If you need help, please reach out to me. Be happy to help you in this endeavor. Reach out to Service Management Leadership. We are here to help you. I hope you have a great, great day.